The morning of March 11th, 2011, began like any other day in Japan. Along the northeastern coast, missions. Fishermen returned from the sea, merchants prepared for business, and families followed their daily routines.
In schools across the region, children attended lessons, never imagining that within hours many of their communities would be changed forever.
Office workers focused on their tasks while businesses operated normally throughout northeastern Japan. Life continued without any sign of the catastrophe approaching.
Far beneath the Pacific Ocean, however, forces invisible to the human eye had been building for centuries.
Along a massive fault line beneath the seabed, enormous tectonic plates were locked together, storing unimaginable energy deep within the earth.
Year after year, century after century, pressure continued to accumulate. Eventually, the Earth could hold it no longer.
At exactly 2:46 in the afternoon, the fault suddenly ruptured. One of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded had begun. Hundreds of kilometers of the ocean floor moved in a matter of moments, releasing energy equivalent to countless nuclear explosions.
Across northeastern Japan, people felt the first violent tremors. What began as shaking quickly intensified into a terrifying struggle to remain standing.
Buildings trembled, merchandise crashed to the floor, and thousands of people searched desperately for safety.
Teachers immediately put years of earthquake training into action, protecting students as the ground continued to shake.
Roads vibrated, power lines swayed, and entire cities seemed to move beneath the feet of their residents. Even in Tokyo, hundreds of kilometers away, towering skyscrapers rocked back and forth under the force of the earthquake. The shaking continued for minutes that felt like an eternity to those experiencing it.
The earthquake measured magnitude 9.0, making it the strongest ever recorded in Japanese history.
Families clung to anything stable as they waited for the violence to end, unsure of what would happen next.
Within moments, emergency agencies recognized the scale of the disaster and began issuing urgent warnings. Television stations across the nation interrupted programming as tsunami warnings were rapidly transmitted.
Authorities urgently warned residents near the coast to evacuate immediately. A far greater danger was now approaching.
The earthquake had displaced billions of tons of seawater, generating a massive tsunami racing toward Japan. Far out at sea, the tsunami traveled at extraordinary speed, carrying destructive energy toward the coastline. Many people immediately obeyed evacuation orders, rushing toward hills and designated safe zones.
Others hesitated. Previous tsunami warnings had often passed without major consequences, and some believed they still had time.
Every minute became critical as officials tried to move entire communities out of danger.
Then the ocean began to behave in a way many survivors would never forget.
The sea suddenly pulled away from the coast, exposing areas normally hidden beneath the water. People watched in disbelief, sensing that something was terribly wrong.
On the horizon, a dark shape began to appear. At first, it seemed insignificant. Then, it continued growing.
Within moments, many realized they were looking at an approaching tsunami.
People began running for their lives as the ocean surged toward shore.
The tsunami struck with overwhelming force, easily surpassing many protective barriers. The boats that had spent years on the water were lifted and hurled into towns like toys. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath a torrent of water, mud, and debris. Across the Sendai Plain, a vast flood spread inland, consuming everything in its path.
Drivers desperately tried to outrun the advancing water, but many soon discovered it was moving too quickly.
Some survivors escaped to rooftops, hoping they had reached safety before the water arrived. Factories, warehouses, and industrial facilities were swallowed as the tsunami continued its relentless advance. From the air, the devastation appeared almost impossible to comprehend. Entire sections of the coastline had vanished beneath the flood.
In a matter of minutes, countless people watched helplessly as homes, businesses, and cherished memories were swept away by one of the deadliest natural disasters in modern history.
The tsunami did not stop at the shoreline. It continued pushing inland, carrying entire pieces of towns with it.
The force of the water was unlike anything most residents had ever witnessed. Buildings that had stood for decades were destroyed within moments. Communities built around the sea suddenly found themselves under attack by the very waters that had sustained them for generations. Thousands became trapped, isolated by rising waters, and cut off from rescue.
Throughout the region, teachers and emergency workers struggled to protect lives as communication systems began to fail.
Everything carried by the tsunami became a dangerous projectile, adding to the destruction. In countless acts of courage, ordinary people risked their own safety to help others escape.
Entire communities such as Rikus and Takata suffered catastrophic losses, with vast sections of the town effectively erased.
In some locations, nearly every building near the coast was destroyed.
As the tsunami began to recede in certain areas, rescue operations started under extremely difficult conditions.
The disaster triggered secondary emergencies, as fires erupted among the wreckage.
Many survivors arrived at emergency shelters with nothing except the clothes they were wearing. Communities immediately began supporting one another in a remarkable display of resilience.
As night fell, the true scale of the tragedy remained unknown.
Millions were without electricity, and countless families still had no information about missing loved ones.
Adding to the hardship, freezing temperatures and snowfall affected many parts of the disaster zone.
Across the region, families desperately searched for news of relatives and friends. While rescue efforts were beginning elsewhere, another crisis was quietly developing along the coast.
At Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, workers were already responding to the earthquake.
The reactors had automatically shut down as designed, a safety feature intended to prevent disaster. Initially, it appeared that critical safety systems were functioning properly. Even after shutdown, nuclear reactors continue producing heat and require constant cooling.
Plant operators understood that maintaining cooling was absolutely essential.
But the same tsunami devastating towns farther north was now racing toward the nuclear facility. When the tsunami arrived, it exceeded many expectations and overwhelmed protective barriers. Seawater flooded critical areas of the station, reaching systems that were never intended to be submerged. Backup generators that supplied emergency power were knocked offline. Suddenly, engineers faced one of the most dangerous situations possible at a nuclear facility. The station had lost much of its ability to cool the reactors. Workers immediately began fighting to restore critical systems. As cooling became increasingly difficult, temperatures inside the reactors began to rise. The teams worked tirelessly under extreme pressure, searching for any way to prevent catastrophe. As darkness settled over the plant, the situation continued to worsen. Operators faced rapidly changing conditions and difficult decisions.
Every passing hour reduced the margin for error.
Inside some reactors, water levels were beginning to drop.
Engineers attempted every available method to restore cooling.
By the following morning, the nuclear emergency had become a matter of international concern. Governments and experts around the world closely monitored developments at Fukushima.
Authorities began ordering evacuations around the facility to protect nearby communities.
Many residents believed they would be gone only briefly.
For many, however, those departures would become long-term displacements. Inside Fukushima Daiichi, the struggle to stabilize the reactors continued around the clock. The world was about to witness one of the most serious nuclear emergencies in modern history. As a new day began, the crisis at Fukushima was entering its most dangerous stage.
Plant operators faced an increasingly difficult reality. Reactor temperatures continued rising despite every effort to restore cooling.
Without sufficient cooling water, parts of the nuclear fuel were becoming exposed to extreme heat. Teams worked under immense pressure, knowing that every minute could determine the outcome of the disaster. Engineers searched desperately for ways to restore electrical power to critical safety systems. There was little rest. Workers continued their efforts around the clock. As temperatures increased, hydrogen gas began building inside several reactor structures.
The situation was becoming increasingly unstable. We're losing containment pressure in the secondary loop. Initiate emergency cooling protocol immediately.
Then came a dramatic event that would capture the attention of the entire world. A powerful hydrogen explosion tore through the outer structure of Reactor Unit 1.
Images of the blast quickly spread across international news broadcasts.
Around the globe, millions watched in disbelief as reports from Fukushima intensified.
Even survivors of the tsunami now faced growing uncertainty about a new and invisible threat.
Authorities worked urgently to assess the risks and protect nearby populations.
Thousands more residents were instructed to leave their homes immediately. Entire communities began relocating as authorities expanded safety measures.
Many families departed, believing they would return within days.
Some homes would remain vacant for years.
Inside the facility, workers continued confronting extraordinary challenges. Despite growing dangers, teams remained committed to preventing a far greater catastrophe. Conditions inside several reactors continued deteriorating as temperatures remained dangerously high. The crisis soon spread beyond a single reactor building. Another powerful explosion struck Reactor Unit 3, sending debris high into the sky.
The world grew increasingly concerned about what might happen next.
Across Japan, anxiety spread as new information emerged hour by hour.
Experts around the globe carefully monitored every development.
At Fukushima, conditions became more difficult with each passing day.
Engineers struggled to manage pressure and heat within damaged reactor systems. Extraordinary measures were introduced in an effort to cool the reactors.
Many tasks had to be performed in environments carrying significant risk.
Additional explosions further complicated the emergency.
The nuclear facility had become the center of one of the most serious technological crises in modern history. Meanwhile, displaced residents struggled to adapt to uncertain futures.
Thousands found refuge in temporary shelters across Japan.
Many vulnerable residents faced particularly difficult circumstances. Even during tragedy, communities searched for ways to support one another.
Many people were forced to leave behind farms, businesses, and lifelong possessions. Entire landscapes suddenly stood empty. While attention focused on Fukushima, the tsunami's devastation remained immense.
Across northeastern Japan, thousands of responders continued searching for survivors.
Every discovery brought either hope or heartbreak.
Many families still had no answers about missing loved ones.
Support arrived from across the nation and around the world. Countries from every continent offered assistance. Emergency supplies reached areas that had been cut off by the disaster. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to care for the affected population. For many survivors, uncertainty became a daily reality.
Countless lives had been changed forever.
As the days passed, Japan faced the enormous challenge of recovery. The earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear emergency had become one of the most complex disasters of the modern age.
Yet amid unimaginable loss, the determination of survivors, rescuers, and communities would begin shaping.
As emergency operations gradually transitioned into recovery efforts, Japan faced a task of unimaginable scale.
Millions of tons of debris had to be removed before rebuilding could even begin.
Among the wreckage were photographs, family heirlooms, and reminders of lives forever changed.
For many survivors, even the smallest recovered item carried immense meaning.
Thousands who had lost their homes moved into temporary housing, while long-term reconstruction plans were developed. Life continued, but for many families it was far different from the life they once knew.
Communities worked hard to restore a sense of normalcy, especially for younger generations.
Education resumed as quickly as possible, despite the extraordinary challenges. Across the region, transportation networks were rebuilt piece by piece.
Roads, bridges, and railways became essential priorities in the recovery effort.
What had taken nature minutes to destroy would require years to rebuild.
The fishing industry, a cornerstone of many coastal communities, faced enormous losses.
Yet determination remained strong as communities worked to restore their livelihoods.
The harbors slowly returned to life, symbolizing the resilience of the region. At Fukushima, a different kind of recovery was underway. The nuclear emergency required one of the most complex cleanup operations ever attempted.
Engineers faced the difficult challenge of stabilizing damaged reactors and preventing further releases of radioactive material.
Thousands of specialists worked tirelessly to manage the crisis.
Temporary systems and new infrastructure were rapidly introduced to support long-term recovery.
Researchers carefully studied the impact of the disaster on surrounding communities and ecosystems.
Many evacuees longed to return home, but uncertainty remained.
Entire communities stood frozen in time. The sudden evacuation had left countless reminders of interrupted lives.
Japan responded by strengthening coastal defenses against future tsunamis. Like Halate's case. Lessons learned from the disaster influenced major changes in planning and preparedness.
New safety measures were designed to help protect future generations.
Communities across the country renewed their focus on disaster readiness.
The memory of March 11th became a powerful teacher.
The Fukushima disaster also reshaped global conversations about nuclear energy.
Many nations re-evaluated emergency planning and reactor protection measures.
The lessons learned extended far beyond Japan.
As recovery continued, remembrance became equally important. Communities honored those who had lost their lives. For many, grief remained a constant companion. The memories of loved ones continued to guide the rebuilding process.
Each year, Japan pauses to remember the events of that day.
The nation reflects on both the tragedy and the extraordinary courage displayed during the crisis.
Over time, many communities rose again from the devastation. A new generation began creating memories in places once defined by disaster. Economic activity gradually returned to many affected regions.
Recovery was not easy, but persistence produced remarkable results.
For some, returning home represented a deeply personal victory.
Yet even years later, work at Fukushima remained far from complete.
The cleanup and decommissioning process would continue for many years. Nature had revealed both its beauty and its overwhelming power.
The disaster also revealed the strength, compassion, and resilience of humanity.
Ordinary people performed extraordinary acts in the face of unimaginable hardship.
The region continues to move forward while honoring the memories of those who were lost.